Hello makers, I'm Catherine Harris with Sheer Stitchery, and I wanted to share with you a sew along as well as a pattern review for the Lekala 4298 wool coat. I wanted to start with the sew along because, well, we all know that the Lekala patterns are not the greatest in terms of instructions, and then I will dive into a pattern review at the end. So let's get started. So we're going to start with those complicated pieced princess seams in the front. So we're going to sew the middle front to the middle upper front. Now it is described differently in the pattern instructions because the pieces are named differently than what they're labeled on the actual pattern. So I thought I would write it on the bottom so that everyone can follow along. So now that we have that, we now have our middle lower front and middle upper front piece, and we're going to sew that to the side front piece. And of course, we're going to do right sides together, and we're going to do that on both the right and left sides. And once we have that done, we are going to get our pressing ham out and some steam, and we are going to shape that bust area. Do use a pressing cloth. I didn't in the entire video, so just make sure you use a pressing cloth. Next, we're going to sew the upper middle front and middle lower front piece to the center front piece. So with right sides together, we are going to pin that in place and just follow along on the curve. Now being careful because it does cinch in here at the waist, so I'm just using a couple more pins as well to get through that curve to ensure there's no puckers, and you're just going to match up those notches as well, and they should line up quite nicely. Now that it's all stitched and you've pressed the seams open, this is what it is going to look like for you. And now we're going to sew the placket on the right front piece. So not the left, but the right side of your overcoat. If you were making a men's jacket, it would actually go on the opposite side. And so we're just going to stitch down that, and it's going to look like this, and we're going to press that open as well. Now, something is wrong with the pattern drafting in this pattern. So you can see that I've pinned it together, so I haven't stitched it yet, but there's something wrong with the armhole. I've got a lot of extra fabric here. I've got this weird piece jutting out, tons of extra fabric on the shoulder here that I think I'm going to have to take out. And I think I'm going to have to just cut this out, but we will continue working and seeing if it comes together any differently. And so we are going to move on to the pocket flaps. So we're going to take the pocket flap linings here, and we are just going to pin them right sides together, and we're going to stitch along the edge, leaving the top open just like so. And then we're going to clip the curves to make it a little easier to turn. And once we've got that all done, we're going to turn it right side out. And then we're going to get our iron with a nice good bit of steam and press it, as well as top stitch it. Next, for the welt pockets. So we are going to draw the welt square on I'm doing the lining piece. They had it cut out of the main pocket piece of the wool fabric here, but it's just too thick for me. And this piece should be about 2 inches wider for it to be easier to sew later on. So just so you know, if you're making it, I knew it as soon as I started drawing, and I should have just cut a new piece, but alas, I did not. So just make sure that you bear that in mind. And I'm just drawing the rectangle on here, and I'm drawing my little dog ears on the end here. And then next we are going to ensure that the pocket top fits on here, and then we are going to place our welt pockets on. Now I did angle my pockets. You could have them straight across, but I thought that with it angled in the opposite direction, that little seam is going at the top created a nice detail to really point everything in towards the center here. So I decided to go with a slanted pocket. Now we're going to lower our stitch length and we're going to stitch all the way around the perimeter of that and then cut through all of the layers, but making sure that you don't cut all the way to the edge, because we need to leave those little triangle pieces at the end, because that is what we are going to stitch through when we attach the pocket bags on. So we're going to flip this now over to the wrong side. So this is what your pocket is looking like. And one thing that you can do is you can give it a good press, because that'll help to make everything stay in place. So just grab your iron and get that pressed nicely. Now I did cut the top off here because I am going to be attaching the pocket flap on here, and I did top stitch on the bottom just to hold that in place. So along the top, we are going to pin with the right sides together going along here, and you could have left it a little bit longer. I just find it easier to match everything up this way. And then we're going to stitch along there, and that's what that will look like. And now we're going to attach the bottom of the pocket bag here. Now this pocket bag is a little bit of an odd shape. It should have been longer just to accommodate that little extra piece that I put in there. But, you know, hindsight's 2020. Once again, I could have cut a new piece, but I was just not feeling it. There have been a lot of complications in this make, and I kind of wanted to push through it. So we're just going to stitch there, making sure you catch that little dog ear in there, and I just cut off the bottom of the rest of the pocket here. So my pocket's a little bit smaller, but it is still quite functional. So this is what it looks like, and you can top stitch the top here. Now we're going to move on to the back of the jacket. So we're going to sew the center back to the side back pieces. So this one's still a little bit easier than the front because we don't have that complicated piecing going on. And so once it's all secured, we're just going to take it over to our machine and stitch it in place and press it open. Next, we're going to work on the kick pleat. So right in the center, you've got the kick pleat. So what you're going to do is you're going to stitch the center seam, but we want to make sure that it's within our seam allowance here, which is 5/8 of an inch. So I've made a little mark here, and I'm just going to pin it in place to make sure that it is secure. And then we're going to pin going all the way up to the top and stitch going down. Next, we're going to clip and press open the seam going up from the top, and now your kick pleat is free to move from side to side. Now the next portion of this is how we're going to form the bottom of the kick pleat. So I'm just creating a notch at the length that the turnover is going to be along the bottom of my hem, which is 1.5 inches. And I am going to cut this notch out, and this is just really to reduce that bulk. If you had a lighter fabric, I don't think that that is necessary. Now we're going to fold the kick pleat on the one side over, right sides together, and we are going to match it up with the bottom of that notch that we have cut out. And I'm just giving it a little press because you also want to press over the seam allowance on the other end so that it finishes it nicely. Oops, my pin didn't stick there. I'll just add an extra pin in here. And then we're going to stitch just along the bottom. So once you have it stitched, we are going to push it right side out, and it should look like this. And this is going to be the top portion of our flap. So you can see that it's nicely turned over. And then we are going to press this flat, and sorry, it's slightly off camera. I should have moved it down just slightly here. And I'm continuing to press that seam allowance going down as well. Next, we are going to fold up the seam allowance along our hem so that we know how much that is for future reference. I'm just pinning that in place, going along both sides where that hem is going to be. And there's our flap. Now onto the side seams. So for the side seams, we're going to place the front and the back together. We're going to match up the notches on here. And we're just going to stitch it together and press it open nicely. Now onto the shoulder seams. So with the shoulder seams, we are going to place them right sides together and attach them at the shoulder seams. And then we are going to stitch that in place. And I am forgetting here that I had previously pinned this and realized that there's a lot of extra fabric here, which I will at a later date have to adjust. So bear with me, that is coming. But if you've already made up a muslin and you've made the adjustments to the pattern, you should have no issues. Now we're going to fix those odd pieces because I stitched it together, and here's the odd pieces once again. You can see the neckline is really jaggedy and it matches up in the center seams. It's slightly off. I just need to pull the one side down a little bit. I haven't pinned it in place, but it's so significantly off. I'm going to have to trim this up, which is what I am going to do. I am going to cut out on the inside of the armhole, and I am going to come in at the shoulder. So I've taken out these seams that I have just stitched, and I'm going to take it up at the shoulder. And that's a significant amount, especially for a pattern that's apparently made to measure. And so then I'm just going to take that out, stitch that in place, and I also stitched in the princess seams just a little bit at the waist. Now we can move on to the collar pieces. So you've got the under collar and the upper collar, one of which is interfaced, and we are going to place them right sides together, matching up those notches, and we're going to stitch the collar stand to the collar on both sets of those. And we're going to stitch just along the curve here, and then we're going to clip the curves and press it open, and then we're going to place them right sides together, and we are going to stitch around the edge of the collar. Now, if you are making this for the first time, I would suggest doing up a muslin, because I found that this collar is actually too short from where it comes in at the princess seam to come in at the center. So I regret not doing up a muslin with this. So after you've stitched all around and clipped the curves, we're going to turn it right side out. And then we are going to press the collar, and we're going to roll it slightly down towards the underside of the collar so that it doesn't show. And don't forget to use a pressing cloth. I did have, you can see those little white marks as I press them. That's because I didn't use a pressing cloth. Now onto the facings. So we're going to attach the facings in at the shoulder seams, and I did have to adjust my facings based on the adjustments I made to the shoulders earlier. And so you can see that we have a notch on the front here, and that is going to match up with the notch of the facing. And I'm just going to pin that in place. I'm putting double pins at the notch because we are going to stop our stitching at the notch. And then we're going to go down, and this is how we're going to do the hem on the other side. So you've got the 1.5 inches, and that is where I'm going to stitch. I pressed it in place. You could also use tailor's chalk to denote that. And this is what it is going to look like once that is all set in place. And it's open here from the back so that we can attach the collar pieces. I'm thinking it's looking okay. It's not my finest work, and I am rushing on it. I wish I could do it again. Now back to the collar piece. And on this, we are going to match the front and back collar, matching the collar stand notches to the center back pieces. So we're just going to attach the under collar first. And then you can attach the over collar to the facing piece because that's the piece that's going to be on top. I'm going to stitch that down. And this is where I'm attaching the upper collar or over collar piece. And I'm just attaching that, and then I'm going to stitch that in place. And now we have our collar all attached. This is also where you can put your label in your jacket. And we are getting on the home stretch. Now we're going to do some shaping along the collar piece. So get your tailor's ham out and then get some steam from your iron, and you're going to sit it up and you're going to bundle it up like you're doing up your coat, and you're just going to steam it. And then I'm using my hand to press it and mold it in shape and really shape that wool into the curve of your neck. And I'm also going to do this on my dress form as well. And I'm finding the collar, it's not sitting the way that I want it to sit. And I really think it is because it is too short for the way that it was designed. And when I look at those line drawings, it is not coming out the way that it should based on those line drawings. So I would adjust this collar if I were you and I was making this pattern. I'm just steaming it to get it in place and to get it to lay how I want it to lay. And wool has a nice memory so that once you've steamed this and it's cooled, it's going to really hold that shape for you. And now, once we've got that done, we are going to move on to the sleeves. So with the sleeves, we are going to attach the upper and the under sleeves together. And we are going to match over at the notch, and I've made the same notch that I did on the kick pleat at the seam allowance line, because that is where we are going to stop our stitching. So we're going to stitch going all the way down the one side and then the other side, stopping at that notch. And then we're going to press it open, and then I've also pressed under the hem of the sleeve. And then we're going to create a snip here going in diagonally so we can create some movement on the vent for our sleeve here. And we're going to create this vent very similar to the way in which we created the back skirt vent. And sorry, some of this is off camera, and I'm just going to stitch along that line, and I'm cutting out that bulk right there after I've cut that or stitched that in place. And then we're going to set in the sleeves. You can set a row of gathering stitches along the top and then stitch it in, and you're going to be very careful to match up some of those points. Now onto the back belt. So we're going to fold it right sides together. We're just going to pin in place. And then you are going to stitch around the perimeter of the belt, leaving a small opening in the center for you to turn it out. Now it is very bulky, so you want to clip those corners so that you can get a nice crisp point when you turn them out. And then we're going to turn it right side out and get our iron. Oh, quickly, we're going to use the point turner to point out those edges to really get some nice sharp points. Now we're going to get our iron and press it, and then I'm going to hand stitch the opening close just using a ladder stitch where you take a small stitch on one side of the fabric, and then directly below that on the other side you are going to create another small stitch, and you continue along this to stitch it up. And this is where it is going to be placed. You can place it with 2 big buttons on either side, or you could do 4 small buttons, 2 on either side here, but I'm going to do the 2 large buttons in the center here. I think that will look the nicest. Now we're going to move on to the lining. Now you're going to construct that the exact same way that you constructed the main body. This is just the sleeve here. The vent is open. I've got my gathering stitches for the sleeve cap because I missed filming that on the other one, and we're just going to set those sleeves in. Now onto the bottom hem. So now we've pressed up the 1.5 inches, and that is our bottom hem. We are going to press up 2 inches on the lining fabric because we want our lining fabric to be shorter than our jacket fabric so that it doesn't peek through from the outside. Then we're going to place right sides together, and we are going to pin all along the bottom, and we're going to go all the way across the bottom on the lining here. Do not forget to leave a small opening so that we can turn the coat right side out later on. Now, before we fully stitch the lining in place, you want to add those buttons on because you don't want to go through your lining fabric. So add the back buttons on. Back over to the lining. So now that we've got it stitched in place, we are now wanting to match it up with the facing pieces, but we're going to do the sleeve vents now. So don't do the facing pieces quite yet. So we're just going to attach the lining to the right side of the sleeves, and then we're going to turn the sleeves right side out, and I've pressed this so you can see how that looks like that. And then we're going to add the buttons going down the edge, and you're going to do the exact same thing for the other sleeve. I'll just show you me turning it. I've got a little opening at the top here, that it comes through, and then we're just going to pull that fabric through to the right side, and you will have a small opening left that you will have to hand stitch, but this way everything is nicely enclosed, and then just hand stitch this top little area down, and it's nicely enclosed. Give it a good press and it will lie nicely. Okay, now we are going on to attaching the lining to the facings. So we're going to attach lining to the facing and the bottom if you haven't done so already. I know I mentioned it in a prior step, but I decided to skip that because I wanted to do the sleeves before I did the vent. So we're going to do the vent, and then we're going to add some finishing touches, that being our buttons. So you're going to place your buttons and your buttonholes on the jacket. And with that being done, your jacket is completed. So we've now constructed the coat. I thought I would talk a little bit about the overall pattern drafting to start. Now, Lekala Patterns, you can order either a standard size or you can get a made-to-measure pattern based on your specific measurements. And so I decided to use my made-to-measure measurements, and I've used Lekala Patterns in the past and I used the same measurements. Now, there was one wonky little bit which you can recall from when we were talking about the armholes in the construction. When I had put it together, it just wasn't making much sense. And there were some weird pieces jutting out and it just didn't look right. Now, I had referred to the line diagram to make sure I had all the pattern pieces lined up exactly where they needed to go, and I guess the overall construction of the garment looks like it fits. That being said, there was something going on with the armholes, so I basically just trimmed that away and made it work. But just let me know if you encounter that same issue if you make this coat as well. Another thing that I am not too keen about is the collar on this. So when you look at the line diagram, it looks like the collar kind of extends longer. And I guess if we were to undo the button here, it would come out and we would have more of a point down here, but it's got like a longer curve coming up towards the collar. I think that it would have been better if the collar was drafted so that it came down a little bit further into where this placket seam starts on either end. I think it would just lay a little nicer as well. And as for the rest of the construction, I did not use the welt pocket flaps that they had used in the instruction. I am using a lovely wool fabric, also from Miverva, which happens to be one of my favorite fabric suppliers. And it is rather thick because we have rather cold winters here in Canada. And if I were to use all of that fabric, it would just get so bulky. So I decided to do a little bit different of a welt pocket, as you saw in the construction, than what was described in the instruction manual. Now, that being said, it turned out quite nicely. Personally, I think I prefer the jacket without the flaps, so I tuck my flaps in as opposed to having the flaps, but that's just your own personal preference. I decided to slant them so it also mimics those same curves that go inwards towards your waist. In terms of the rest of the fit, it fit quite nicely. I did take it in a little bit, and I know that they're accounting for some ease within the coat since it was made to measure, but it was just still a little bit too bulky and big. I had to really cut down where my shoulders were because it was just coming out just too much when I had it on the dress form, as well as taking it in along the princess seams in the waist. Other than that, it turned out quite well. and I'm pretty pleased with it. I also really enjoyed this color, which is called mushroom. It is a unique color that you don't see every day in stores. So you see a lot of tans and beiges and dark blacks and different colors, but you don't see a lot of this. And this really plays as a neutral in a really earthy tone. And I thought it would look quite lovely in fall and winter when I'm going to be wearing this coat. So if you've tried any other Lekala patterns, let me know what your favorites are in the comments down below. Please, if you enjoyed this video, do give it a big thumbs up. That really does help me. And if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing. Until next time, makers, let's get our sewspiration on.